The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Deep Space Nine episode, Indiscretion. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel is Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going, Dom?
Very well, thank you. Folks, remember to like The Secrets of Star Trek on our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. You can find us on Twitter, where we're at SQPN, and we'd love to hear from you, your comments, wherever you find us. Be sure to follow us on social media. I want to tell you about another show on the network you are sure to enjoy, The Secrets of Middle-earth. That's right, it's a returning show that right now we're discussing the new Amazon series, Rings of Power. And so you definitely need to check that out. That's wherever you find fine podcasts or at sqpn.com/Middle-earth. But this time we're talking about the Deep Space Nine episode, Indiscretion. And so, Father Cory, can you give us a recap of what happens?
Be glad to. Major Kira Nerys is contacted by an old associate from the Bajoran resistance days. He claims to have evidence of the Cardassian freighter Ravenok. A friend of Kira's, Lorit Akram, was on the ship when it disappeared. She agrees to meet the associate, but before she can leave the station, a Cardassian asks to join her, Gul Dukat. Dukat claims it's due to the ship being under his command when it was lost, but later turns out to be personal for him as well. He reveals that he had a Bajoran mistress and a half-Bajoran daughter on the ship and wants to see if they survived. Kira becomes sympathetic towards Dukat until he much later reveals he needs to kill his daughter, Torzial, to protect his reputation. The two do find the crashed ship with the survivors as slaves in a Breen mining camp. Dukat's mistress and Kira's friend both died along with a number of other passengers on the ship, but Zial survived. After Dukat and Kira free the slaves, Dukat is convinced not to kill Zial, but to take her back to Cardassia with him despite the consequences to his reputation. Meanwhile, as all this is going on, the relationship between Ben Sisko and Cassidy Yates is getting more serious than Ben wants to admit. After receiving relationship advice from pretty much everyone on the station, Ben admits to Cassidy that he does want her to move on to the station. The end.
Everybody except the actual married guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Like nobody who else is married.
No O'Brien giving advice.
Right. So just to set it in time, this is a fourth season episode of Deep Space Nine, so in the middle. Fifth episode, we've already had the Klingon attack on Cardassia, that whole stuff like that, the way the warrior Worf has joined the crew, just to kind of as a refresher on where we are in Deep Space Nine. And one of the background things that come up, because this is a Cardassian episode really, is in the behind the scenes information like that's on Memory Alpha and other places. The developments in Cardassia at this point are modeled on the fall of communism in the Soviet Union. This came out in 95, so it's just pretty fresh in everybody's mind. So you have a military-sanctioned government replaced by a civilian government, but in this case, we're going to see the military government come back. Well, kind of 20 years, 30 years later, it kind of has in this Russia too, but never mind. So you had the Obsidian Order, which was, kind of the backbone of the old totalitarian government. And but once they were overthrown in the Die is Cast episode, the dissidents were able to take control, from the military-controlled government, and so now you have a civilian-controlled government. So that's kind of a little bit of a background on this.
Yeah, the Obsidian Order was kind of like the KGB meets the Russian military, the Soviet military. Yeah,
they were like a KGB that had a military arm. Really, yeah. They had their own, warships and stuff like that. They went to attack the Dominion and didn't come back.
Yep, exactly.
Another interesting thing is the revelation that this story is kind of based on the John Wayne movie, The Searchers.
Interesting.
Which is a similar idea, which involved a man looking for, in this case, his daughter who had been in wife had been taken by It's been a long
Like
time since I
Rustlers or
watched
something like that, or
Native Americans. I forget now.
yeah, I haven't.
Exactly.
That's one I haven't seen of his. So
fictional events, 19th Century West. Blah blah blah. It doesn't say. Okay, I was looking for a plot summary, but quickly pulling it up, and it's a John Ford movie, so it's a really great Western.
oh yeah, that would be one of the good ones.
It's Library of Congress culturally significant films, and it's set during the Texas Native American Wars. John Wayne's a middle-aged Civil War veteran who spends years looking for his abducted niece. That's what it was, accompanied by his adopted nephew Martin, played by Star Trek's Jeffrey Hunter, the original
Excellent.
Captain Pike. Yeah, great movie. Definitely, if you check it out if you like Westerns at all.
Pretty much everything John Wayne was in is worth watching. But
Yeah. So that said, one of the interesting things I find about this story is Dukat, the evolution of Gul Dukat, who is evolving. Like when we started the series, he was just pure villain. He was the overlord of. Actually, this kind of has echoes to something we were just discussing for a different show, The Secrets of Doctor Who. Which had an overlord and oppressed people, but he was the overlord, overseeing the occupation of Bajor, and just was out and out bad guy villain.
I mean, if he had a mustache, he'd be the one twirling the edge of it, and cackling.
And I gotta say, Mark Alemo does a great job. Dukat is a great villain, like throughout the series. But he's evolving from pure villain to something more ambiguous. He's still the bad guy. He's still one of the main antagonists, but he's something more. He's getting layers, shall we say.
Yeah, at this point, he actually starts becoming more of a sympathetic character. He becomes more of a character that we start to like, even if he is still kind of a villain. You can't really call him the total antagonist by this point, but he's definitely again, he's kind of a shows up once in a while and causes trouble, but
he's an agent of chaos.
He becomes more sympathetic,
yeah,
until eventually he goes off the deep end, and
which related to events in this episode. And it's interesting because like Kai Wynn never becomes a sympathetic character for me. Like I in fact actively dislike the episodes that she's in. I mean, I hate whenever she shows up because I just dislike her so much. She's just so drives me like crazy. Whereas Dukat,
my dear child,
just she's like, what's that lady, Dolores Uxbridge, whatever it is in Harry Potter. Like she's like that, like just. Whereas Dukat can be fun and funny and just like a bad guy, but he's kind of interesting. The other interesting thing about this episode is this is where the relationship between Kira and Dukat begin to evolve. Like they'll never really be friends, that's clearly. But this is also where you start to think that Dukat's starting to get his romantic ideas about Kira.
Yeah.
And like she's like would never like this would never. She would cut off her arm before she had any romantic idea about him. But there's a softening toward him, a humanization, so to speak, of him.
There's definitely a respect that starts to develop here. Even if she still remembers everything he did, and of course I like that they brought that up with the Razga Karn, the associate that they meet up with, where it's like, oh, I could turn you to the Maquis, and the Dukat's like, yeah, I could turn you into the Cardassians.
Right. Yeah.
Let's set all that aside, shall we?
Yes, let's pretend. I mean, there's also like later on, and we'll talk in specifics, but there's this idea of, it's easy to be enemies with someone that is just this figure. Like you may know them, even talk to them, has met them in person. But when you spend time with a person, you eat a meal with a person, you go through experiences with a person, you may not become friends, but there's a shared experience that causes, that gives you, I don't know, a common ground that you can approach each other on. And I think that's subtly done in this episode. I mean, there's that whole part later where they have that funny laughing thing, which we'll talk about. But
that was a great scene.
Yeah,
but yeah. No, like I said, I really think it's she started to see him with respect. He was no longer the villain. He was no longer the devil, the pointy-horned devil.
Right. Like they do remind us from time to time in this episode even of who Dukat is and what he's done. Like there's no forgetting that. But he's also a person, and people are complex. And even, as they say, even Hitler loved his dog. Like that doesn't make him a good person, but people are complex. Bad people, evil people can still do good things, individual good things, and still have good impulses, partly because of that's the image and likeness of God that's built into us at our very core. That's
exactly,
that connection to the eternal, to God, still shining through even in the worst person.
Well, and you kind of see Dukat too, of like he was doing the job he was there to do, and whether he liked it or not, whether he thought it was a great thing or not, he was doing what he was following orders, and he was going to do it to the best of his ability, regardless of what that did to the Bajoran people.
Yes. Right. He saw that as a good, and of course, objectively speaking, you should never obey an evil dictum or follow an illegal order, or however you want to put it.
Exactly.
But that said, he thought what he was doing was good, and that even comes up. We'll talk about that in a second. How he's kind of looks at it as, well, we helped the Bajorans.
Yeah, exactly.
But you mentioned that he does worm his way into this mission to find the mystery missing ship, the Ravenok. Actually, let's skip ahead to that part where they're on board the runabout, because he talks about Kira talks about being part of the Shakar resistance cell, and Dukat talks about it like, oh yes, that old Shakar resistance cell. You were such a challenge that we couldn't overcome, and it's kind of like dark or chilling because the challenge was he was trying to hunt Kira and kill her and her friends. Like, it wasn't a game. This was life and death, and it's just he treats it so kind of clinically. It's very chilling when he does that.
Well, it's interesting too, because wasn't there another episode where he kind of basically mocks her, saying, "Oh, your little resistance cell, it was nothing."
Yeah.
I think it was early on that he kind of did that. It's like, "Oh yeah, your little resistance cell, you're just fleas. We just let you be."
Right. Right. Well, and it turns out, that's him just trying to diss her. They were accomplishing something. And this is when he says he admires Kira, that how she embodies the new Bajor, and he says, the occupation helped the Bajorans by making them stronger. And this is the quote. When we arrived, you were a weak, contemplative race. I like that. Contemplative is bad. Choking on your isolation. And now you have a new confidence, a whole new sense of purpose, not to mention a key role in the future of this entire quadrant. And what that made me think of is like the abusive husband who says, "Oh, when I married you, you were just, weak and, now you're strong. Look at you. You're strong and confident. And yeah, I had to become strong and confident to throw you out, you jerk."
Well, and it's like, I hate to say it, but it'd be like Germany saying, well, if it wasn't for us during the two world wars, Europe would have never been united as it is now in the European Union.
Right. France, you should be grateful that we made you stronger and gave you a backbone. No.
or the Soviet Union to Poland. Poland, you were just this weak country that kept getting fought over, and we gave you strength. Right.
Well, I mean, it kind of sounds, to bring a little contemporary politics into it, Russia talking to Ukraine today. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Although Dukat says one thing in this conversation that is true. Bajor and Cardassia will one day become friends. They do. And in fact, Discovery in season 4 kind of shows that they actually become united. The
president of the Federation is human Cardassian and Bajoran.
Right. Which is kind of an interesting combination. So it's funny how he kind of sees it, although I'm not sure what he intended was the same thing that eventually happens. But Kira recoils at that idea, understandably. Meanwhile, I kind of want to go back and forth with the B plot with Cassidy and Cisco, because it's interesting, and that's the way it kind of happened in the show.
Yep, it kind of bounced back and forth. Yeah.
So Cisco is things are going well with Cassidy Yates, their relationship. But it turns out, oh, look, she's going to get a job, here in town. Like, it's great while she's the girlfriend who comes and goes and isn't around all the time. We're not taking it seriously. But now she's going to get a job locally, and she's going to move in next door. The essential equivalent.
Oh, yeah.
There's a moment when Dax says, oh, like, where are you going to live? Oh, I'm going to live on my ship. Oh, you should get quarters on the station. I'm sure Benjamin would help you. And Cisco gives this look to Dax that could boil milk. I mean, it was, he was mad. Yeah,
that's one of those where if looks could kill, Dax would be looking for another symbiote or another host.
Yes. He's like, what are you doing? And she's like, she almost wants to swipe her hands, say, my work here is done. I threw the grenade in the relationship and left. Like, what are you doing, Dax? It was kind of funny.
That whole plot, because then later on, Ben's talking with her. And by the way, should mention Cassie Yates played by Penny Johnson.
That's right.
Who, of course, more recently is on The Orville as the Doctor. Does an amazing job in that.
Yep.
But they're talking, it's like, she's talking about this. Yeah, maybe I should get a place here on the station. He's like, well, that's a big step.
Yes.
What do you mean by that? That's a very big step. And of course, she blows up.
Right. She says she takes the job. He's not very enthusiastic about it. Oh, that's nice. And then, when she says that she's, it's a big step. It's a very big step. And then he has to end up going to, we have a later scene where he's at Quark's and he's talking to Dax and Bashir, and Quark worms his way in with some terrible advice. But he's like, he says, you didn't say it's a big step, did you? I did. I think I might have actually said it's a very big step. Oh, a very big step.
No, you didn't follow it up with a very big step, did you? I don't remember, but I think I might have. And then, of course, after he leaves, they go, what do you think? Oh, it's a big step. A very big step.
That was really good.
That was such a great scene.
That was a very good scene. And of course, Quark has like terrible advice about, basically Ferengi treat their women terribly, and that's like what you should do, which is no. So back on the planet, where they eventually come upon the crashed ship. They have tracked the ship back to this other planet where it wasn't expected to be. They found the crashed ship, and they found these buried bodies, a handful of the crew and passengers. And so Dukat, like, oh, I need to dig up the bodies and identify them. Clearly he's lying. Clearly he wants to see if his mistress is among the dead, and doesn't want Kira to see. But he makes up this story about Cardassian beliefs versus Bajoran beliefs about the body after death. And he says Bajorans are much more concerned with the souls of the dead than they are with the physical remains. How did Kira Maressa put it? What remains after death is just a shell, a sign that the Pa has begun its final journey to the prophets. And I kind of want to stop and kind of talk about that a little bit, because it's an interesting belief which looks at the human body as a shell. And a lot of human beings, a lot of Christians actually kind of approach the body and death the same way, that we're really a soul encased in a body. But that's not really Christian belief, right?
No, that's much more closer to like Buddhism. Hinduism, I believe, is very similar. Where the body is just the meat robot that we use to move our souls around when we're alive. And so we don't respect we don't need to respect the body after it's dead, because it's no longer there. As Christians, we believe very differently. That when we are alive, we're created by God to be united, body and soul. That the two are in union when we're alive, and death is the breaking of that union, body and soul. And the soul does leave the body, but ultimately we were destined and will be destined to spend eternity, body and soul, that our bodies will be resurrected. And that's why we as Christians, we respect the body enough that we have places called cemeteries where we bury our loved ones. We buried those who have died, whether cremated or not, and that's a whole nother argument for a whole nother time. But we bury the bodies, and these are places of honor, places where we respect those who have died. Some cultures go, you're like the Day of the Dead, which, sounds, that sounds depressing. No, it's like in the Philippines, they go and have like picnics at the cemetery in their family plots.
Right.
To celebrate their family members who have gone before them. I think some places in Latin America do the same.
Yeah.
And so it's a beautiful culture that recognizes that this body that is there, that is probably, depending on how long the person's been there, is probably rotted away to nothing but bones and dust, but it is still the earthly remnants of someone we've loved and will one day be resurrected, recreated, and will be reunited body and soul in eternity.
Right. Yeah, and that's the important point too. Is like we are as much the flesh that we can touch as we are the soul that we feel, our intellect and all that other stuff. That's us. That's all of us.
Yeah, and that there are Christian heresies such as Gnosticism that have fallen into that trap, and that's part of the reason why there were heresies where, it was, God's soul in a human body, and Jesus was really just human but adopted, and things like that, where they didn't understand the connection in our Lord between his human nature and his divine nature.
Right. Like in Manichaeism, like says all material things are evil and only the spiritual is good. And yeah, that's kind of been at the heart of so many heresies, Christian heresies, is this division, dividing the body and soul and looking at the body as somehow not us in that sense. So I thought that was interesting to bring up. And that's one of the things I like about Deep Space Nine is it kind of, every once in a while it swoops in on these religious, spiritual levels, and you get a chance to kind of think about this sort of thing. And that's one of the great things about science fiction is it can let you do that without having all the regular religion, the baggage of having to talk about real religions.
Exactly. And assuming Dukat wasn't lying, he was just using it to his advantage.
Yeah.
The Cardassians almost have the opposite view, where it's the body is the more important part than the soul. It's a very materialistic view, that the material matters more than the soul that's in it. So that's kind of an interesting insight into Cardassians. Again, assuming it wasn't something that he made up for the excuse to get Kira Nerys to go play on the computer while he's digging up the body of his mistress.
It would track with Cardassians' attitudes about strength and the power is important, and strength of the body and that sort of stuff. So that would track with that sort of belief. But it turns out that his real reason for coming, like we said, is his Bajoran mistress who was on the ship, and he finds that she's dead, but that her daughter is their daughter is probably still alive. Yeah, she'd be, I think, 19. She was like 13 at the time of the crash. It's been 6 years, so she's like 19. And it's kind of interesting how he talks about the fact that he really did love the mistress, that even though he has a wife and 7 kids back on Cardassia, who we, by the way, never see in the series.
No, we don't see the kids. We don't see her. But it was interesting because the mistress and daughter were on this ship, which was a prisoner transport, because they were going to meet another freighter that was then going to take them to a planet where they would be safe from the occupation ending on Bajor, because he knew, or he figured anyways, that the mistress and the daughter would be at risk when Bajor takes back over from the Cardassians.
Yeah, collaborators are never treated very well at the end.
Collaborators and then half-breed, to use the term that they would. Yeah, that kind of the slur that would be used.
Right. So that she and Kira recognizes it, and she tells Dukat, like, don't you dare hurt this child. Let me take her back to Bajor. She'll be fine. And he kind of goes, well, what kind of life would she have there? Well, a life. It's kind of like the pro-life argument, where people say, oh, what kind of life could this baby lead, in this being unwelcome in this home? It's like, well, it's at least a life. It's not,
it can lead a life if it's not killed.
Right. It's better than dead. It's interesting that but she does propose it. It's kind of like Mother Teresa saying, if you don't want your child, give it to me. I'll find a loving home for them.
Oh yeah.
So I mentioned before, like, the shared experience and the laughing thing. So Dukat and Kira are camping out, and Dukat ends up sitting down on a sand spine, I guess it's called. It looks like a sharp crystal, and man, that was long and sharp.
Yeah.
and he got it right in the rear end. Oh my gosh.
It was absolutely, it was a hilarious scene. Of course, Kira's over there laughing before she can even pull it out.
Yeah, yeah. And then she gives him the dermal regenerator, and he's like bent over, running it over his backside, and she's laughing at him, and he's like, this isn't funny. And then he eventually starts laughing, and then he's like, you know what's even funnier? It's not working. She's like, you have to turn it on.
Yeah, you forgot to hit the on switch.
So, and again, it's like that humanizing effect of, spending time with a person, sharing a meal, laughing over a shared experience, that sort of thing. I think, again, well written. I really think that this episode really threads the needle on humanizing Dukat while also reminding us of who he is and what he's done. And so I really like that aspect of it.
Well, and he keeps so much of his pompous arrogance through a lot of it. And of course, this scene is the difference of that. But he still has that Cardassian arrogance. But yet we get to see him as, again, somebody sympathetic, somebody that he truly did love his mistress, even if, again, the whole issue of having a mistress in the first place when he was married with kids, but that's another story.
Right. Yeah, there's a vulnerability to Dukat in this episode, and that happens several times over the course of the series where he has to be vulnerable, and our heroes, whether it's Sisko or Kira or whoever, has to take that time to show him a helping hand and be in a way a loving gesture toward them,
compassionate, truly showing compassion.
Yeah, exactly. Back on DS9, we have a nice scene where Jake tells his dad that you're acting out of fear with regard to Cassidy. Your fear that if the relationship doesn't work out, you'll feel responsible for it not working out. And it's like, here's Jake kind of growing up, being a little bit of an adult who can tell his dad what for. And it's nice to see Jake continuing to grow and mature in these ways. He's not the kid who's getting in trouble with Nog on the promenade like we saw in the first couple seasons.
Mention of Nog, but he's not. We don't see him.
That's right. Yeah, he's talking to Nog about his dad's relationship problems. Everybody's talking about it. So then this is about when we discovered that the survivors of the crash are basically slaves in a Breen dilithium mine. Okay, this is where I want to talk about the Breen. Why do the Breen look like the bounty hunter Boushh from Star Wars Return of the Jedi?
I have always wondered that.
Yes. I mean, there's differences, but yeah.
It's the same basic mask.
It is.
I mean, it really is. And when you hear the Breen speak, it doesn't translate, as I recall.
No, but it also
in this episode, you don't hear him speak at all. But in TNG especially, they don't translate it, so it's like
mechanical
bounty
screeching,
hunter.
Right? Which is like that bounty hunter. Like, no one's ever adequately explained it. I was even Googling like why, and of course people coming up with, well, there's this interdimensional wormhole between worlds. Like, no, really, like behind the scenes, why? And so no one's ever.
I wonder if they got the suit for cheap.
Maybe.
I'd laugh if it ended up being like the original Breen suit was like a actual Star Wars prop.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, or whoever the costume guy was really loved that character or something, or made it, or was the guy who invented that character. I don't know, but yeah, it's just kind of wild. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, I was always wondering that too. If anybody knows, if there's any books or something like that talk about it, I would love to hear why. And I'm with you, Dom. It's always kind of questioned that.
So there was a series of novels, Star Trek novels, Typhon Pact novels, which talked about this allegiance, this sort of Warsaw Pact of the future between the Romulans, the Breen, the Gorn, and the Zinti, I think it is, where against the Federation and the Klingons. But it we got a lot more insight into who the Breen are, and they're actually a multi-species race. That they all wear this same uniform. They have this cultural thing about we're all exactly the same, so they all wear the same outfit all the time, almost kind of like the Mandalorians. They never take their helmets off.
Yeah.
And so it has one of the species that make up the Breen has a snout, so all the helmets have a snout thing on it.
Interesting.
I thought it's kind of a clever invention. Anyway.
Yeah, and they did say in this that the Breen homeworld is frozen. It's a frozen planet.
Right.
So that explains why they've got the suit that perhaps they need it for cooling too. I mean,
right, or heating, but yeah. Depending, yeah, if the
cooling on the desert planet.
Right. Yeah, because if they evolved in a cold environment, right. So they find Zial, and when Zial tells Dukat, basically he's about to shoot her, and she realizes he's not there to rescue her. He's there to save his reputation. Basically, he needs to, kill the half Cardassian, half Bajoran child, so that his reputation and thus his power standing in Cardassian politics isn't damaged. She basically says, "Okay, well, if I can't be with you, if I can't come home with you as my father, I'd rather die." He can't go through with it.
Yep.
To his credit. I mean, not to his credit that he was going to do it in the first place, but at least to his credit, he couldn't do it. The irony for me here is that it's going to be her eventual death at his hands, accidentally, that will drive him mad and be his undoing.
Yeah.
So it's
he definitely takes her as his daughter. I mean, that this is, she becomes very important to him as we see her later in later seasons. Including her becoming in a relationship with Bashir? The Taylor.
Garrick. That's right. Yeah.
And of course that drives him nuts that his enemy Garrick has a relationship with his daughter.
Right.
But she becomes a very important part of his life. And like you said, he was already starting to tip over the edge. He was already starting to kind of lose it a little bit, and it was the last straw.
Yeah.
That broke him.
But Zial becomes that element in the stories over time where like Kira likes Zial. She's a good person. Zial is obviously a good person.
Mm-hmm. How
could she love this monster of Dukat? And it becomes this knotty problem that Kira has to kind of, how do you explain love? That's the thing, is how do you explain, how could you love him? He's this thing. And she's like, well, that's not all he is. And it becomes this interesting social problem that just this emotional, relational problem that Kira struggles with. And we as the audience struggle with her.
Exactly. And we get to see him in, I keep using the phrase, but in a more sympathetic way through her eyes, through the eyes of the daughter, Zial.
So in the end, Dukat says he's going to take Zial back to Cardassia after all.
Which you see in Kira's face, stuns her that he's actually changed and has accepted her. Right.
Now, eventually, he's going to bring her back to Bajor because it turns out she's more accepted on Bajor than she will be on Cardassia. And because it's a problem. But this step here is actually still surprising. Meanwhile, Sisko has apologized to Cassidy and admits that his reaction was him still feeling the effects of Jennifer's death and the fear over basically him getting too close to her and then having her die the same way too, since they're out here on the edge of space and all bad things are always happening because you're in Starfleet. Bad things happen. I like how Cassidy ends it. Like she's going to forgive him. She's not quite there yet. She doesn't let him give her a kiss. She kind of walks away. And credit to her for that. She's not going to let him.
Kind of flirts with him a little bit on it, but it's like, you're not there yet, buddy boy.
Yeah, he's not off the hook. You've still got to get your way back. But
you're still sleeping on the couch tonight.
Yeah, right. If they're married, that would be the couch. And that's where we wrap things up. So any other notes on this episode?
Roz Kakaran, the associate that Kira meets, was played by Roy Brocksmith, who was the Zach Dorn strategist on the TNG episode Peak Performance.
Oh, right. That's where I saw him before.
That's what he's probably best known for in TNG or in Star Trek is for that role.
Yeah, he's another one of those guys who has showed up at a lot of guest appearances in a lot of different TV shows. So he died in 2001. So
he died not long after this. Surprisingly,
he was pretty young, 56. That's young, by the way.
I'll take your word for it. I'm not there yet.
I'm not far from that, so it is young. So let's just put it that way. May you rest in peace. Okay, if that's it, could wrap things up there. We'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Star Trek, including Regina C., Brian B., John N., Tony L., and Joe E. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And we'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. So that's it from us. What did you think of this Deep Space Nine episode, Indiscretion? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, our Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. You can send an email to trek@sqpn.com or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. And we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the Voyager episode, Jetrel. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, only a Cardassian would call this hellhole invigorating. Or I could have said, who knows more about women than me? Quark's line.